Welcome to another episode of In Conversation With. Today we have the amazingly talented Myah Asha Jeffers.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you for coming. So, I've been doing a lot of reading on you.
Okay.
And I was saying before you turned up how impressive, I don't know if it's the way you wrote it, but it was really impressive in terms of your achievements and kind of your journey and your multidisciplinary kind of activity within industry. So I kind of want to hear it from you. Kind of tell us, who is Myah?
Oh, that's the $1 million question, isn't
Yeah.
it? Who is Myah? I always categorize myself as a photographer, first and foremost, a writer and a director. And I haven't done it in a while now, but I'm also a dramaturg in theatre, which means I've worked with playwrights to develop their scripts. And that's essentially how I started out in writing and directing, really, working with other artists to, I guess, establish their vision.
Yeah,
and their story.
That's really interesting because I know a lot of filmmakers that start off as photographers, but I've never really heard the mixture that you have. Like, how did you? So you started as a photographer.
Yeah.
What was the journey? Did you get into? At what point did the theatre part come into it?
Yeah. So I love telling this story, but on my 10th birthday, my parents got me my first ever camera, and I remember all of the girls in my class were in the living room dancing to Beyonce, Destiny's Child,
Obviously,
Dangerously in Love, and if you know me, you know that I can't dance. So my way of sort of moving through the awkwardness was I was going to take some pictures of my friends. And I realized the power and the beauty of being able to document a certain moment. And that same day, I remember my mum called me and my brother into the living room to take a photograph with my older brother. So we have this really beautiful family portrait. But that moment was the final time that I saw my older brother, because 6 months later he tragically passed away.
sorry to say that.
That's okay. But I think I just, in that moment, in that day, I really understood the power of what it means to document.
Yeah.
Because it's an archival thing, what it means to show emotion and love and an experience through the power of an image. And then as time went on, I studied English at uni, always loved writing stories, and I did a theatre module, randomly took a theatre module and absolutely fell in love with the form, just in terms of how it used plays and words and bodies and movement to, I guess, document a certain time. And so I decided that I wanted to be an actor, a writer-actor, and wrote my first ever one-woman play and performed that at the Birmingham Rep, performed that at Tallowa Theatre Company. And through doing that, I met a really incredible dramaturg called Jane Fallowfield. And she would ask me these really incredible questions about my play. She would really sort of push and provide provocations to establish the story even more. And I just remember thinking, I think your job is cool as hell. And I want to do that. And so I told her that, and she took me under her wing and really taught me what it means to critically analyze a script and to really understand structure and character.
Yeah.
And so that was, the sort of starting point.
It's really interesting because, like, you was talking about the power of archiving, and it's something that I've come to realize quite recently. Because one of my younger sisters does archiving.
Okay.
And I used to think it was the driest thing ever. But then when she showed it to me and sort of like how it's done and the different ways and the power of archiving and those memories and stuff like that, it's super important. It's really interesting as well.
Yeah.
So I love how you've managed to kind of interweave that into your creative practice. And it's like being able to be, I don't know how you would even categorize yourself as a creative. You're just a creative at this point.
Yeah, just an artist that works with story.
Yeah.
Essentially.
So there are a lot of achievements which have happened along the way.
Is there? I don't know.
There was a long list of achievements.
Oh, thank you.
Can we rattle off a few?
Go for it.
No,
Shall I do it?
I want you to do
Okay.
it.
Oh gosh. Okay, so Portrait of Britain Awards 2019 and 2021. What else? Oh, so for the film Bathsheba, which hopefully you've just seen or are about to see, we were nominated for Best Film and Best Director at the Soulfest Awards, and we also won Best Performance.
Yeah.
And we're also nominated for Best British Short Film at Leeds Fest and Norwich Film Festival as well. And my photographic work, it's been shown in various publications in the UK.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think one of them was Elle.
Elle, Vogue, The Guardian. Yeah.
Yeah, so just a little busy.
Just a tiny bit.
It's really cool. So, talking about your short film, Bathsheba, watched it. It was beautifully written.
Thank you.
It was beautifully shot. But it touches on, when I was watching it, I felt like it touched on quite a few themes.
Yeah, for sure.
Which I think was done really well. And I know your kind of mission as a creative, from what I've read, was more a case of kind of highlighting the sort of experiences of the Black diaspora, queer experiences, and so forth. Was this film directly meant to do that or not? Because I felt like it was really so well that I felt that any community could have been put in that situation. It would have made sense, and it was amazingly relatable. Was that a purposeful thing, or is it directly a story about that Black experience within this moment?
Yeah, I think, Black experiences are fundamentally universal experiences. And so I'm always of the belief that I want my stories to not necessarily just sort of pound home this idea or this experience of what it means to be Black, but just show us in our glory, in our nuance, in a way that feels deeply relatable. Like, I don't wake up every morning and go, oh, I'm Black. Like, I just literally live my life. And so, I want the characters to be able to have that same sense of agency over their lives. But in terms of the themes, I think I was conscious of the fact that it's not easy to make a film. And I really just wanted to throw everything into this film, because the reality is I might not make another film again. So I just want to put everything into this one. And so the big themes that for me felt integral were grief and fundamentally the housing crisis. And what it means to be a Black older queer person in that situation, and how that then impacts your sense of self in your daily life. Yeah.
So when it comes to storytelling, and in particular with this film, what makes you lean into that story? Like, why this story, and why kind of now?
Yeah.
Was that kind of, because I know, like we spoke earlier about how there are moments where you're writing a lot, right? And you're writing all these different stories, and some of them are terrible, some of them are amazing, but you might have like a collection of really cool stories that you can tell, but you have to choose one. Why this story?
Yeah, I think so. So the film is about guardianships. So guardianships are essentially disused buildings that managers can sort of take over and bring people in to guard the building. And so often the folks who were guarding the building, who were living there for a fraction of the price of a typical rental, means that you have no rights as a renter, as a tenant. And so if the sink goes, or if there's a hole in the ceiling, you can't call your landlord. You kind of have to fix it yourself. And I'm a guardian. I live in a guardianship.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And so I was I've been there for nearly 5 years. And I was very much aware of the precarity that was at place in terms of having my own place and being able to afford it, but knowing that at any moment I could be evicted, at any moment, if anything goes wrong, I have to fix it. And on top of that, guardianship managers can sometimes really misuse their power. And so they can come into your flat whenever they want. And I wanted to speak about that. And so initially the idea was to do a photographic project. It was to photograph people in their different guardianships. But as time went on, as I was sort of developing the idea, it felt really imperative to maybe make a character study. And I had a neighbor who was living above me, she was in her 80s, and we were living in very similar situations. And I started to understand, or at least consider, what it means to be an older person in that position, what it means to have that sense of precarity whilst you've actually lived a whole life and you're now in this situation. And so, yeah, the film was born out of that, out of me wanting to dive a little deeper into the realities of a very specific person.
Yeah. And you know, and that's, I don't know, that's why I love speaking to the writer, the filmmaker, the creator behind the work, because even though it's talking about a specific kind of living situation, it's so relatable, especially now with the cost of living, with that insecurity of housing, with renters and so forth. That is kind of, like you said, a universal kind of experience that everyone can sort of relate to, which is an amazing thing. I loved, one of the reasons I loved watching your film, obviously the story was done really well, and I loved the fact that there was like minimal dialogue. There was just so much space, which I think is so brave.
Yeah.
Like, and it was, but it was communicating so much without having to say a lot. There was like, visually, for me, it was like walking around an art gallery.
Oh, wow. That's really special.
And so that it made sense to me when you say you're a photographer, because every single shot was intentional. It felt like this to me. You may have just completely fluked it and done something amazing, but to me it was just like, literally, it was like watching. One of my favorite artists is Carrie Mae Weems, and she does that digital photography and stuff like that. And it reminded me of that kind of curated shots. What was the creative thinking behind that? Like, and it's also being black and white as well. What was that whole creative thinking behind how we're going to portray this story?
Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head in terms of the sort of photographic curation of it. I was, just from the get-go, I knew that I wanted the film to have a photographic sensibility.
Yeah.
And so my photography is primarily black and white. I only really shoot film. And there's something about the abstraction of black and white. Like, you see a color photo and you know exactly what it is. Whereas with black and white, you have to look a little deeper. And I wanted that for the film because all of the color has been absolutely pulled out of Angel's life. And so what better way to showcase that than to make a black and white film? And in terms of the shots, you know, I worked with a really incredible DOP called Ebba Holt, who instantly got it. And so we'd speak about photographic references. Like, I'm a huge Roy Decarava fan and Gordon Parks. And so I wanted to find ways to, best sort of honor that type of work, as well as my own photographic eye as well. Yeah.
So I know you mentioned the DOP that you worked with. How, because this is quite a personal story, because it's obviously inspired by, in part, your own experience of your living situation. How important was your team that you sort of, I'm going to say, curated for this? Because I know sometimes with filmmaking, I've done it many times, it's like you kind of like have to find the cool people that you can find who are available, who are willing to kind of take a bit of a hit on their normal day rate.
Yeah.
Because I don't know, I just get the sense, and the more I speak to you, I get the sense that you're very purposeful in the decisions you make creatively. Was that the case with the team that you brought around? Was it like, oh, I need to work with that person because they can bring a certain thing to this look and feel and brought into the story in the way that I need it to be done?
Big time. Yeah, it felt like I was assembling the Avengers.
Yeah.
Literally, like my producer, Victoria Bavister, she's amazing and really supported in setting up some of those meetings. And so I went through a few weeks of meeting with my hit list, my sort of short list of all of the folks that I really deeply admired and folks that I knew could bring something to the table. And then we just had really lovely chats.
Yeah.
And through those chats, I chose a really great team of HODs. You know, you had Kobe Yates on the costume design, who brought Angel to life just in terms of what she wore. Billy McKenzie, incredible hair and makeup designer. Just some really, Rob Lewis, who composed the score. He's an incredible cellist. And we worked really closely to bring the sound to life, because obviously cello is such a huge part of the film, and so I wanted to really play with how the cello can be used to its limits.
Yeah.
And so we really pushed the sound and the capabilities of that instrument to get the best out of the story, and he really smashed it. So yeah, we had a really great team, and I felt really honored to step on set for the first time on the first day and have all of these gorgeous faces, you know, all bring their heart to the film. Yeah.
So I know you're talking about, 'cause I think it's so understated how important it is to get along with people that you work with.
Big time.
Because it's those conversations that develop that creative and actually getting people to actually click on to actually understand what you're trying to achieve. So when you're on set, you're not running in two different directions.
Right.
And a lot of the time it's very time sensitive, so you haven't got the time to actually hash out what the creative is.
Yeah.
People need to have a knowledge and understanding of what it is as soon as by the time we're on set, everyone's on the same page. How is your process when you've got this script? So you've got the Sheba script. You're like, okay, cool, I'm happy. This is the shooting script that I'm happy with to present to this first person to look at, to say how they feel about it. That nerves. Because there's always that thing that they might come back and be like, yeah, what is that?
Right. So scary.
What's that process like for you when you finally get a script and you're like, okay, I'm in a comfortable space with it? Obviously, it can always be developed up to a point of actually filming, even during filming.
Yeah,
it can develop.
Totally.
What does that process look like for you?
In terms of, you mean sort of handing the script over to others?
Yeah, and then having that conversation to develop it to filming. What does that look like for you?
I think it really depends on the person who I've handed it to. What was really brilliant was, you know, having those chats and just being in prep and dissecting the script with individual HODs, and they sort of brought their own source or ideas to the table, and then that really expanded the film. But also, I think a huge learning curve, and one of the most incredible things that happened on that process was working with my editor, Marnie Holland, because we completely revolutionized the film just in that cutting room. You know, she was brilliant and super rigorous, and so some of the things that I felt like I knew at script stage or at shooting stage then kind of dissipated once we saw it.
Yeah. And
so we really worked hard to just shape it in a way that felt best for the spine of the project.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, I think it shifts. And as a director, I've just learned to relinquish control, obviously have your vision, but be as open to the changing of the story, because you can't hold on to it, because that's potentially where the downfall could happen. You have to allow it to breathe.
Yeah. You know? I always think, like, when it comes to storytelling, it has like 3 lives.
Big time.
It has that moment, that life when you've written it, then it changes when you film it. Because sometimes what you've written sometimes might not work in practice, and so it has to have that flexibility to adapt.
Yeah.
And then post.
And
the post can just change the whole viewpoint of the story. And then obviously at each stage you want it to improve.
For sure.
But like, I love that idea of being able to relinquish control, but you also need that team around you you trust to relinquish that control too. Because it's a hard thing to do. And because you're not just a writer, you're a director, you were involved with producing it as well, was you?
No, not producing.
Well, that's good.
Yeah.
Because I don't know how.
I wouldn't have been able to do it.
Yeah, I know. But being able to be so involved with the project and being able to actually, you know what, I brought you on here for a reason, to see it from a different angle and improve it. I trust what you're trying to do. You understand what the overarching kind of creative is. Is a beautiful, painful journey to get to, because it's not something you can do overnight. It takes time and it takes experience, and obviously building your tribe that you trust around you. There is, and I think I've mentioned it already, there's a very distinct kind of style that you have.
Thank you.
Which is really cool, because it sometimes takes a very long time to actually find that as a creative, because you're always playing around, and you should always play around and sort of like tinker with it. What for you, or who for you, has been the biggest inspiration for that?
Oh, so many people, Benjamin. I think that it got to a point where, before even filmmaking, where I was really disillusioned with the photographic work that I was making. You know, it all started to look the same, feel the same. It was all color, sort of people posing in a very specific way, and I got really bored. And it was a time where I went back to basics.
Yeah.
And I had to rediscover what it is that I loved about the documentation of people. And for me, it was the truth of existence. It was reality. It was how people moved when they felt no one was watching.
Mm-hmm.
And so my photographic work then began to sort of take on that theme. And so that's when I turned to black and white, and I would do more sort of documentary, photojournalism stuff. And so when it came to making films, I wanted it to have that same sensibility. And so a lot of my references or inspirations are not necessarily filmmakers, they're actually photographers or playwrights. So Debbie Tucker-Green, for instance, is an incredible storyteller in theatre, and I just love the way that she uses dialogue and the human voice to really convey truth. Mm-hmm. In humanity. And photographically, people like Zanele Maholi, or as I mentioned, Gordon Parks, these folks are really intentional about how they best document and present people.
Yeah.
And so filmmaking, I was trying to sort of take all of those references and put it into film. Yeah.
That's quite impressive. Because it's quite a few different references.
Yeah.
And to be able to mold it into something coherent is quite a beautiful thing. And I think it's well done. Because I think, to be fair, I've seen some of your photography work, and I've obviously seen BATHSHEBA. From what I've seen, there seems to be a lovely red thread in terms of that style. So I think you found it.
Thank you. Wait, job done.
No, it's amazing, and it would be really cool because I think this is your debut short, which is wild. Like, genuinely, it's wild because I remember mine.
I'm trying to see that. You need to send me the link, man.
Oh, I'm not sure. I'll show you the next one. But it's a process, and for you to be able to be this strong off the bat with your creative and actually being so sure about it, because it's not a case of, even though there's that level of, okay, I'm going to relinquish control a little bit to the creators I have around me, you have to be very strong within your creative vision for them to be able to execute in that kind of way. And if, like I'm saying, you're looking at your photography work and you're looking at your film work, and then you can see, it's like, oh, I know who did that. Nice. That shows a level of confidence in your work. And I think, well done, first of all. Because I know it's a very hard thing to do, and especially in this industry when you've got so many experienced people. And to be fair, a lot of the time when I'm in the room, I'm the least talented there. So to be able to be like, no, you should do that, it can sometimes be, you kind of second guess yourself as a creative. And especially when someone else with a lot of experience is saying, no, maybe you should try that. Be like, no, there's a reason why. So I think that's really cool. And I think it's an amazing space to be at. What would you say brought you to your themes? Because I had a little tinker on your website, and it was really insightful, sort of like seeing you sort of like talk about, well, I know you don't like talking about yourself, so it was like very light touch, but in terms of when it comes to storytelling, your drivers in terms of what stories you want to tell, and kind of what kind of messages you want to convey. What was the journey to finding that? And is that something that is, I don't want to phrase it as a sort of activist moment, but is that something which is going to be, do you hope or plan to have as a driving theme for all your work, or is it just, I don't know, and sort of like an overarching kind of sort of like driver for you?
Yeah. I think what's made me move towards these themes, I make work based on my experiences. And so, if I'm lucky, touch wood, to make another film again and have a career in this, I want to make work that reflects the lives of specifically Black queer women. Yeah. We rarely see that on screen.
That's true.
And also I have this really fascinating obsession with grief. That's like a really huge thematic thing for me at the moment. I did and still am doing a project on funerals, and so I photograph funerals, and I've been doing that for about 3 years. And I think there's just something so beautiful about how people grieve and how the legacies of those who have passed then just sort of infuse into those who loved them. And so I want to continue making work on that. Also, migration, movement, how we move through different sort of spaces, what it means to be of the diaspora. Those are all the sort of big overarching themes that I think, even without even realizing, are constantly coming out in my work.
Yeah.
And yeah, I think a big turning point for me was just, I at first I'd really obsess on the technical. So I really wanted to make something that looked beautiful. I really wanted to make something that looked pretty, whether that was photography or whether that was, sort of doing some experimental moving image on a digital camera. But it got to a point where I knew that I needed it to have some substance.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, you can have the most beautiful film or the most beautiful photograph, but what is it saying?
Had that conversation so many times. And with the festival, we get to see so many amazing films, amazingly shot films. And I remember I'm not going to say what the film was called, but there was a film, I think it was submitted this year to our 2024. And it was shot so beautifully, like stunningly. But it said absolutely nothing.
There we go.
And I was like, that's one of the things I would say, because the story's king. And it's like, what are you trying to say?
Yeah.
And it's not for me to, because I think every story has an audience and is valid.
For sure.
And I don't think it's for me to say whether it's, worthwhile or not, but you have to be saying something.
Yeah.
And I think, and that's one thing I really liked about your statement, was that, like, it was so unambiguous. It was like, this is kind of my focus. This is where the stories I want to say. These are the sort of things I want to highlight. And it was just very certain. So I know, like, if I'm looking at your work, if I'm watching your films, I know exactly what the messaging is going to be.
Yeah.
Which is quite powerful. And the whole element of grief and how you portray it as well. I don't know, it's, like you said, like, it's weird but beautiful, if it makes sense. Like, because, like, grief is something that we always try to avoid.
Yeah.
And to be able to capture that in a way which is still shows the pureness of the grief, but in a way it's quite beautiful and quite peaceful.
Yeah, it's the most moving emotion, I think, and every time I experience it, it's painful, but I can feel my body, and what a blessing it is to be able to feel that, to grieve deeply means you've loved deeply.
Yeah.
And I don't think we should shy away from that, yeah.
It's probably the most aware you are of yourself.
Big time.
In that moment, because everything's being questioned. You're looking at everything in that moment.
Yeah.
So, brave.
Thank you.
And being able to, like, I think because you touched on with this film as well, and there was like that touching moment where was it a cello? I'm not great with instruments.
Cello, yeah.
And they just hugged with the cello in between. It was I don't know. There was no real, they didn't build up that relationship up until that point. And then that moment still felt authentic. It didn't feel as if it was, orchestrated in any way. And it was just beautifully done.
Yeah.
I'm a fan, if you didn't realize.
Thank you. But it's funny because that moment actually was authentic. So that hug wasn't necessarily scripted. And so, we really whipped it into a frenzy. That was the final scene that we were shooting. And that hug just came organically because both actors were really in it. And yeah, it was just really special to witness and to know that we've all collectively created something that was felt,
And you know what? I feel that if that hug didn't happen, there would have been something missing.
Big time, yeah.
Because that was such a beautiful moment. And I think it kind of encapsulated and brought it all together in such a really nice way. And in that shared grief, in that shared kind of empathy of that situation.
Yeah.
So I'm glad it happened, because genuinely when it happened, I was like, this girl's a genius, because it's like, there was just so little being said, but so much being said through the actions. Yeah. So I'm glad it happened, because it's those beautiful moments when you're, like you're saying, you're breathing that team, the casting being correct, which is so difficult. And I think you've done a great job on that.
Thank you very much.
So What's next?
Oh, what's next? $1 million question. You're asking all the questions today, man.
I want to know. I want to know. I told you I'm going to make you talk about yourself.
Love that. So I'm in writing mode at the moment, which if you're a writer, you know it can be, it's hard. It's hard. You just have to get up every day and actually do it. It's not glamorous, but I'm writing a treatment for a feature film based on Marcus Garvey's Black Star Liner, which was essentially a ship that he wanted to take black people from America to Liberia. Never happened, never reached Africa. But I just found that idea of, this mass movement of what it means to have agency in removing yourself from whatever difficulties in a Western place and moving yourself back home. I found that really special. So I'm kind of trying to reinvent a future version of what that looks like. So I'm writing that and also writing a pilot for a TV series that I have in mind. And going to do some photography. Yeah,
that's amazing. Do you know what? I'm actually quite envious of your creative mind.
Oh,
because those ideas are really cool. Those are really cool. Because like even the one with the Garvey idea is like that kind of, I don't know, really cool start to like Wakanda type of feel.
Yeah,
hope. That's amazing.
Well, is the grass greener?
Yeah. Thank you so much. Really appreciate it. There's so much I can talk to you about, and I'm probably going to speak to you after cameras are off.
For sure.
But it's been an absolute pleasure.
High five.
Low five or whatever five.
Low five.
I really want to see your work. I want to see more of your work because I think like you're phenomenal in terms of the work that you're creating. I love the direction and the clear-eyedness of the vision that you have with your work and how much detail and thought you put into it. I just think it's amazing. And I think it's a credit to everything that you've done. So well done. Keep doing what you're doing. Keep pushing.
Appreciate that. And you too. I'm excited to see your films as well.
Yeah, I'll show it to you. I'll show it to you. And then like, oh my God, it's amazing. But yeah, really appreciate it. And I would love to have you down to the festival.
Yes, sure.
Because it'll be amazing. Because I think your journey, your story, your knowledge base, your skill base, like, is amazing. Because it'll be amazing to even do like an exhibit with you.
That would be great.
Like, I just think that would be phenomenal. Because I think taken together, I think doing this kind of mashup of everything that you do into one event, I would just stand there like a kid with like some candy, just like, this is amazing. So,
let's talk, man.
No, definitely, 100%. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Benjamin. And thank you guys.